Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Pleasure to be with you. Don't forget, every Friday is First Amendment Friday on this program. And in the meantime, naysayers go to the head of the line at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. You know, under the law, companies cannot discriminate against somebody because the person is black or gay, or non-binary, or neo-pagans who live their life as a unicorn. So should companies be able to discriminate based on somebody's moral or political beliefs? Scott Shepard is joining me, who's coordinator of the Free Enterprise Project. Scott, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Lars. It's good to talk to you again.
What in the world is Apple up to when they say that the company should not be obliged to even ask shareholders whether it should protect its employees or potential employees against blacklisting and other employment actions on the basis of their political views or their moral philosophy? Why is Apple going this direction?
Well, what it's up to is a whole lot of forgetting. It's forgetting what we all know, or at least all of us who are over 30 know from high school and from history classes and literature classes about the blacklist and McCarthyism and all of the detriments that follow from discriminating in the workplace or elsewhere on the basis of people's private viewpoints. And they've forgotten that lesson. And I think you're probably old enough. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the 1984 Super Bowl when Apple made it a name for itself nationally by running an ad based on George Orwell in 1984.
I remember that one.
A young lady who ran through all the gray-clad followers and smashed Big Brother's television and paved the way for nonconformity and free thinking and the brand new world of computers and later computers and phones and iPods and all the things that are ahead of us. They knew once that you had to allow people to think freely in order to have creativity and innovation, but they've forgotten it.
How do you think freely, though, if this sounds like Apple wants license to be able to say, this guy, this Lars Larson or this Scott Shepard, he doesn't share our moral philosophy or our political views, and we want to be able to fire him for that?
That's exactly what they want, because we've asked them just to ask their shareholders if they should do a study into the risks and detriments that follow from viewpoint discrimination. It should be a fairly easy study to put together. Just show a few minutes of the Army McCarthy hearings, but instead,
have you no shame, Senator? Have you no shame?
That's right. Have one sentence and show some theatrical version of the Crucible. And we'll all relearn everything we've learned in high school, and let people think their thoughts without being hounded out of the public square. But Apple, of all companies, has said they don't even want to ask the shareholders if they should do a study about whether that's a bad idea.
Well, because they know what don't they know to a fair certainty what their shareholders are going to say, and they know what the study is going to show. And let me throw this argument at you, Scott. I've always bought the argument that companies that say, we're not going to put women in management positions, or we're not going to put black people in management, or whatever, we're not going to hire black programmers, are cutting themselves off from an incredible amount of talent, because talent in whatever field it's in technology, in medicine, or anything else, if you cut yourself off from a chunk of the population based on things like skin color, age, race, all these other factors that are protected, you're actually hurting your company, because it means that brilliant black programmer who would have come up with the next brilliant Apple program is not going to find a job there. So you say you can't discriminate on those things, and it's foolish. Even if you left it up to the private sector, I think the private sector would have slowly evolved the same thing we've evolved by creating government-mandated special categories, saying you cannot discriminate in this category. We got to it faster. I don't necessarily know better, but we got to it faster by saying, okay, you just can't do that, period. The government says so. We're going to make it a law. But aren't they doing the same thing if they say, well, if some guy's a Trump supporter, we're going to fire him. We want the ability to fire him because he supports Trump, or he supports traditional marriage, or he supports a belief that taking certain kinds of drugs is wrong, or drinking alcohol is wrong. You're cutting yourself off from an incredible part of the talent pool because there are people who have great talent, but they also hold those viewpoints or morals or ideals. and the company wants the permission from, or does not want to ask permission from its stockholders to be able to get rid of people like that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If you want the best company in the world, you have to pick the best and brightest and most useful for every position, not the best and brightest white people or the best and brightest straight people or the best and brightest liberal people.
Exactly.
You can't cut yourself off that way. I mean, and let me a very recent example, I think from last spring. You'll remember when Gillette, and this has to be because they have some system of not having any conservatives in their ad department to say, wait a second, this is a terrible idea. Gillette, that for 30 years has been telling us the best a man can get and getting people to buy their razors and get in a habit of buying their razors by supporting and putting up a good and wholesome image of men, decided that they were going to run an ad campaign built around the idea that masculinity is toxic and evil. And their share price immediately took a nosedive, as anybody who wasn't just as woke as they could be could have told them. So there are immediate and serious detriments to be had, even in ad departments, if you cut off hiring the best and the whole population.
Scott, here's the thing. I don't like government mandates. I'd like as few government mandates as possible, although I can't necessarily disagree with the mandate that says you've got to treat men and women equally. You've got to treat, black, white, and other equally. I agree with the philosophy. I wish we'd arrived at it through a smart marketplace instead of government mandates. But having said that, here's what I'm concerned about. If I'm discriminated against based on my viewpoint, and some of the major players that are so big, they're worldwide and they have incredible reach, the FANG, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google, if they start doing it, and the next step is going to be that all of their suppliers are going to be asked, are you a supplier that subscribes to our views and gets rid of those troublesome deplorables? And if the supplier doesn't say yes, they're going to say, well, we may give the contract to somebody else. So you have a force in American society today that has never really existed at this scale before. And I can fight back against the government discriminating against me, saying I have to be treated equally to everybody else, even if I'm a Trump supporter. But how do you do it when the private marketplace starts behaving this way? And what they're going to do is they're going to start pushing this on all the people they do business with. And at some point, that interconnected web of people, well, if Apple does it, then Apple's suppliers have to do it. Apple, other people that Apple does business with will have to kowtow to that point of view. And at the same time, Apple's over kowtowing to the Chinese saying, oh, you want to spy on your population? You want to limit what they have access to? We'll be happy to do that, too.
Yeah, well, that's pretty. Just the last couple of weeks, Apple removed from its app store an app that the protesters in Hong Kong were using to avoid the police.
Yep.
And that's a dreadful proposition. But to your point about private action, I want to point out that the National Center for Public Policy Research, where our free enterprise project is, what we're focusing on is private action by shareholders and by corporations.
Right.
What we want from Apple and these other players is just for them. You wouldn't believe how long Apple's non-discrimination policy is, but it just doesn't have any protections at all. They just can't find any space on that page to prohibit viewpoint discrimination. And all we're asking is for the shareholders to kick them in the butt and to remind them what they've long known and only recently forgotten, which is that viewpoint discrimination hurts everybody.
Yeah,
imagine the world in which that Silicon Valley were successful and nobody could hire anybody who's right of center. That's not going to make people suddenly be left of center, whatever it might make them say. It's going to make half of the country very, very angry.
Absolutely right. Scott Shepard from the Free Enterprise Project. Scott, thanks very much. We'll be back in a moment with an impeachment.